The sound of the plate shattering was the only warning. Before the white porcelain had even finished skittering across the marble floor of the obsidian lily, the atmosphere of the room shifted from quiet luxury to lethal intent. Zuri felt the cold, oily press of a 9mm barrel against her temple. The man holding it, Taehyung, didn't tremble. His eyes were flat, mechanical, and hungry for a reason to pull the trigger. "Don't move," he hissed. Zuri's breath hitched. She was pinned against a mahogany pillar, her waitress uniform damp with spilled sauce and sweat. Across the table, Kangdae sat perfectly still. He didn't look like a man who had just been attacked. He looked like a king deciding whether to be merciful or monstrous. "Why?" Kangdae asked. The word was a low vibration, barely audible over the sudden, suffocating silence of the restaurant. "The steam," Zuri gasped, her eyes watering as the pressure of the gun barrel bruised her skin. "Look at the carpet. Table 12. The ribs, it's turning purple." Kangdae tilted his head. On the dark marble, the spilled galbi was reacting with the cleaning chemicals of the floor. A faint, iridescent shimmer, like oil on water, was rising from the sauce. Most importantly, the scent of bitter almonds began to fill the small radius of their table. "Cyanide," Kangdae whispered. He looked at the kitchen pass. Miller, the manager who had been sweating bullets all night, was already gone. "Lower the weapon," Kangdae ordered. Taehyung hesitated, his thumb still hovering over the hammer. "Boss, she touched you. She disrupted the—" "She saved me," Kangdae interrupted, finally standing. He was a pillar of charcoal silk and cold fury. He turned his gaze to Zuri. He didn't see a waitress. He saw a variable he hadn't accounted for. And in doing so, she just signed her own death warrant. "Kyung-soo, clear the room. Taehyung, find Miller. Bring me his fingers. We're starting at the peak of the danger." If you were Zuri, would you have stayed to explain, or would you have run out the back door? Tell us your city and your choice in the comments. You're watching Black X Korean Mafia Boss Stories. Subscribe now to see if she makes it out of the restaurant alive. The restaurant cleared in a frantic, silent exodus. The elite of Chicago knew that when the ILSIM syndicate stood up, it was time to leave. Zuri remained, her legs feeling like water. She watched as Kangdae walked toward the spilled food. He knelt, dipping a clean napkin into the purple-tinged sauce. "You're a student," he said, not looking at her. "I've seen you reading textbooks in the break room." "Nursing?" "Last year," Zuri managed to say, her voice shaking. I recognized the scent. Potassium cyanide. It reacts with the iron in the glaze." "I didn't mean to be disrespectful, sir." "Disrespect is irrelevant when you're dead," Kangdae said, standing up and wiping his hands. He walked closer to her, invading her personal space until she could smell his expensive cologne, sandalwood and steel. "My brother, Dong-sun, sent that plate. He knows my schedule. He knows my taste. But he didn't know about you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold-embossed business card. He tucked it into the front pocket of Zuri's apron. His fingers lingered for a second, a gesture of claiming. "Miller is a dead man," Kangdae continued, "and anyone who saw you save me will assume you're part of my inner circle. By tomorrow morning, my brother's fixers will be at your apartment. They don't like witnesses, Zuri. And they especially don't like witnesses with medical training who can spot their handiwork." Zuri felt a cold chill wash over her. She had worked so hard to stay invisible, to be the black girl in the background who got her degree and got out. In 10 seconds, that invisibility had been stripped away. "I have a life," she whispered, a desperate plea. "I have finals. I have a graduation." "You have a choice," Kangdae corrected. "You can go home and wait for them to find you. Or, you can meet me at 7 a.m. at Grant Park. Bring a bag. Only what you can carry." He turned to leave, his long coat billowing behind him like a shroud. "Wait!" Zuri called out. "Why me? You have soldiers. You have doctors on payroll." Kangdae paused at the door, his silhouette framed against the neon glow of the Chicago street. "My soldiers are loyal to the highest bidder. My doctors follow the old guard in Seoul." You broke the rules for a man you don't even know. That kind of irrationality, it's the only thing I can trust right now. As he stepped out into the night, the heavy glass doors of the obsidian lily swung shut, leaving Zuri alone in the wreckage of the dining room. She looked at the gold card. It wasn't just a card, it was a key to a golden cage. She looked at the kitchen. Miller's coat was still hanging on the hook. He had run. He had left her to face the fallout. Zuri grabbed her bag, her hands still trembling as she fumbled for her keys. She didn't go to the employee exit. She went through the front, stepping out into the cold Chicago rain. Every shadow felt like an assassin. Every passing car felt like a threat. She reached her studio apartment in Little Italy and locked all 3 deadbolts. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the streetlights, clutching the gold card. As the sun began to bleed through the gray clouds over Lake Michigan, she realized Kangdae was right. A black SUV had been idling at the end of her block for 3 hours. They weren't police. They were cleaners. Zuri grabbed her nursing kit, a change of clothes, and her grandmother's old Bible. She slipped out through the fire escape just as she heard the heavy thud of her front door being kicked in. The war had found her. The dawn over Grant Park was a bruised purple, reflecting the chemical stain on the carpet from the night before. Zuri stood near the Buckingham Fountain, her nursing bag heavy against her hip. She felt exposed in the open air, a lone figure against the backdrop of Chicago's skyline. When the black sedan pulled up, it didn't idling. It moved with the predatory grace of a shark. The window rolled down. Kangdae didn't look tired. He looked like a man who existed entirely outside the concept of sleep. "Get in," he said. As the car pulled away, heading south toward a private airfield, the silence inside was a vacuum. Sitting in the back seat next to the man who had effectively ended her normal life, Zuri felt the need to fill the space with logic. "You knew," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You knew Miller was compromised before I even touched the plate." Kangdae turned his head, his dark eyes tracing the line of her jaw. "I suspected. Miller's lifestyle exceeded his salary. But I didn't know how they would do it. I expected a bullet in the street, not a gift from my own kitchen." He paused. "Explain it to me. The science. Why did you risk your life for a cent?" Zuri leaned back, her medical training taking over. This was her intellectual trial. "It's the Prussian blue reaction," she began, her vocabulary becoming clinical and sharp. "Potassium cyanide is stable, but when it's introduced to a high-acid reduction, like your galbi glaze, and heated, it begins to break down. The bitter almond smell is actually hydrogen cyanide gas being released. But there's a micro-flaw in the chemistry. If the glaze contains iron-based salts, which many imported Korean soy sauces do, it creates a thermal collapse. The sauce changes color. It doesn't happen instantly, it happens when the steam hits the oxygen at the table. I saw the first tendrils of purple. 5 more seconds, and your respiratory system would have shut down." Kangdae watched her intently. He wasn't just listening to the science, he was weighing her utility. "And the spicy reduction lie? You came up with that in a heartbeat." "In nursing, you don't panic the patient," Zuri replied. "If I had screamed, 'poison,' Miller would have pulled a gun, and your men would have started a massacre. I had to neutralize the threat without triggering the room." From the front seat, Kyung-soo scoffed. "She's a waitress who read a book. Boss, we're heading into a war with Seoul. We don't need a nurse, we need more shooters." Kangdae didn't look at his lieutenant. He kept his eyes on Zuri. "A shooter can take a life. Any fool can do that. But a person who can see the invisible threat before it manifests? That is a strategist. Dong-sun thinks he is playing chess with a king. He doesn't realize I've just found my queen." The car turned onto the tarmac of a small, private airport. A Gulfstream G650 waited, its engines already whining. "We aren't staying in Chicago," Kangdae stated. "The ILSIM Old Guard has too many eyes here. We're moving to Houston. I have a logistics hub there that Dong-sun hasn't touched. You will be my private medical consultant. You will screen my food, my environment, and my people." "And if I refuse?" Zuri asked, though she already knew the answer. Then you step out of this car and face the men who kicked in your door this morning, Kang Dae said simply. They don't care about Prussian blue. They only care about erasing the woman who made them look incompetent. Zuri looked at the plane, then at the gold card still clutched in her hand. She thought about her clinical rotations, her dreams of a quiet life in a hospital ward. That life was a vapor now. She looked at Kang Dae, a man who was a monster to the world, but the only person offering her a shield. I have one condition, Zuri said. Kyung-soo growled. You don't make conditions. Let her speak, Kang Dae commanded. I'm not a soldier, Zuri said, looking Kang Dae in the eye. I won't carry a gun. And I won't watch you kill innocent people. I save lives. That's the deal. Kang Dae's lips quirked into the ghost of a smile, the first sign of humanity she had seen. In my world, Zuri, there are no innocent people. There are only those who are loyal and those who are a threat. But I accept. You save my life and I will make sure no one takes yours. As they boarded the plane, Zuri felt the weight of the room move. She was no longer staff. She was being claimed. The flight attendants bowed to her, a gesture that made her skin crawl but her heart race. She was entering a world of gold and blood, where her invisibility was her greatest weapon, and her knowledge was the only thing keeping the king on his throne. Zuri is officially in the inner circle, but the old guard is already watching. If you love a protagonist with brains and backbone, hit that subscribe button for Black Korean Mafia Boss Stories. We're just getting started. The transition from the wind-whipped gray of Chicago to the suffocating, humid heat of Houston was more than a change in climate. It was a descent into a fortress. As the Gulfstream touched down at a private airfield near Sugarland, the air that met Zuri was thick, smelling of rain-slicked asphalt and the heavy scent of blooming jasmine. Waiting on the tarmac was a fleet of 3 identical black SUVs. No logos, no plates. This was the ILSIM way, anonymity through uniformity. In Houston, the heat isn't just the weather, Kang Dae remarked as they stepped into the climate-controlled interior of the lead vehicle. It's the scrutiny. Here, the territory is split between the old oil money and the new tech cartels. My brother thinks he owns the ports. We are here to prove him wrong. They drove to a sprawling estate in River Oaks, a neighborhood where the mansions were shielded by ancient, moss-draped oaks and 10-foot security walls. This was the Bayou Fortress. Inside, the decor was a jarring mix of gold and blood, gilded European antiques set against high-tech ballistic glass and biometric scanners. Zuri was given a suite that was half luxury bedroom, half drama center. This is your domain, Kang Dae told her. Everything you requested is here. The antidotes, the centrifuges, the secure line. And the staff? Zuri asked, looking at the stone-faced men patrolling the halls. They report to Sukju, Kang Dae said, his voice dropping an octave. As if summoned by the name, a man stepped from the shadows of the hallway. Sukju was older, his face a map of scars and traditionalist pride. He didn't bow to Zuri. He didn't even acknowledge her presence. Instead, he spoke to Kang Dae in rapid-fire Korean. He says you are bringing a gaijin ghost into the heart of the house. Kang Dae translated, his eyes never leaving Sukju's. He says that in Seoul, a woman's place is to serve the tea, not to check it for venom. He thinks I am weak for trusting a girl from the streets of Chicago. Zuri felt the status pressure in the room. Sukju was trying to drown her with his gaze. She didn't flinch. She used the silence rule, waiting 3 seconds before speaking, a technique she'd learned in psych rotations to assert dominance. Tell him, Zuri said, her voice echoing in the marble hall, that the old guard in Chicago is currently scrubbing purple sauce off a carpet because they weren't smart enough to see the threat. If he wants to follow them into early retirement, he can keep doubting me. Kang Dae didn't translate. He didn't have to. The fire in Zuri's eyes was a universal language. Sukju's lip curled in a sneer, but he lowered his head, just an inch, before turning on his heel and marching away. He will try to kill you, Kang Dae said casually, as if discussing the weather. Then I'll just have to make sure I'm the one who prepares his meals, Zuri retorted. Later that evening the Grand Park Pact was truly sealed. They sat in Kang Dae's office, the walls lined with monitors showing every inch of the estate. The quiet luxury was oppressive. "Why are you really doing this, Kangdae?" Zuri asked. "You have enough money to disappear. Why fight for a throne that's already poisoned?" Kangdae looked at his hands, scarred from a life of violence he had inherited, not chosen. "My father built Ilsim to protect our people when they first came to this country. Dongsun wants to turn it into a meat grinder. If I walk away, the blood of everyone he crushes is on my hands. I'm not fighting for a throne, Zuri. I'm fighting to stop a monster from wearing the crown." It was the first time she saw the burden he carried. He wasn't just a boss, he was a gatekeeper. "You're a strategist," Zuri said softly. "But even the best strategist needs a pulse check. You're redlining. You haven't slept in 48 hours. She reached out, a move that would have gotten anyone else shot, and placed 2 fingers on his wrist. His pulse was a thundering rhythm, a ticking clock of stress. "Obedience is for those who fear the future," she quoted his own words back to him. "But survival is for those who know when to rest. Drink the tea I've prepared. It's just chamomile. No, Prussian blue, I promise." Kangdae looked at her fingers on his skin. The power shift was subtle, but undeniable. For the first time in his life, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. He took the cup. The alliance is deepening, but Sukju is already planning his move. The stakes just jumped from a kitchen to a kingdom. Don't miss the next move. Subscribe to Black X Korean Mafia Boss Stories now for the most intense chapters yet. The heat in Houston was a living thing, a heavy, wet blanket that made the tension in the River Oaks estate feel even more combustible. For 2 weeks, Zuri had operated like a ghost within the machine. She didn't just screen Kangdae's meals, she overhauled the estate's entire safety protocol. She replaced the ornamental plants with non-toxic varieties and installed air quality sensors that could detect aerosolized particulates, the kind used in chemical warfare. Her presence was a constant thorn in the side of Sukju. To the traditionalists, every time Zuri tested a bottle of wine or adjusted the ventilation, it was an insult to their competence. "You spend your days playing with test tubes," Sukju spat during a morning briefing, "while Dongsun's men are moving into the ship channel. We should be striking, not sniffing the air like frightened rabbits." Kangdae leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes fixed on the security monitors. "The rabbit survives because it smells the fox, Sukju. You would do well to remember that." The extraction began not with a bang, but with a microflaw in the environment. Zuri was in the kitchen, her clinical eyes scanning the delivery of fresh seafood for the evening's banquet. She noticed a driver she didn't recognize, a man with a military gait and a tattoo on his forearm that had been partially laser removed. It was a small, faded mark, the symbol of the Kangsapa, a brutal splinter cell of the Seoul syndicate known for their scorched earth tactics. She didn't alert the guards immediately. She knew Sukju's men would dismiss her as paranoid. Instead, she used her invisibility cloak. She grabbed a clipboard and walked toward the delivery truck, pretending to be a board logistics clerk. "You're late with the blue crab," she said, her voice a perfect blend of service worker annoyance. The driver didn't look at her. He was focused on his watch. "Traffic on I-10. Just sign the manifest." Zuri reached for the clipboard, but her eyes were on the back of the truck. There was no smell of fish. Instead, there was the faint, sharp odor of industrial refrigerant, and something else. Something ozone-heavy. A thermal detonator. She didn't sign. She turned and sprinted toward the main house. "Security! Koblak! Seal the perimeter!" The truck driver didn't hesitate. He pulled a submachine gun from beneath his seat and opened fire. The quiet luxury of the morning shattered. Bullets shredded the moss-draped oaks and sent shards of limestone flying from the mansion's facade. "Get him to the vault!" Zuri screamed as she reached the foyer, colliding with Taehyung. "Where is the boss?" Taehyung barked, drawing his weapon. "In the study. Go!" The first explosion rocked the estate. It wasn't the truck, that was a distraction. The real trap was the garden shed, which had been rigged with a high-frequency jammer. Suddenly, the biometric scanners turned red. The safe house had become a cage. The electronic locks had defaulted to secure mode, trapping Kangdae inside his own office while a tactical team of Kangsapa assassins scaled the rear walls. This was the shock phase of the rhythm. Zuri didn't have a gun, but she had the professional vocabulary of the house. She knew the ventilation system better than anyone. She ran to the service closet and grabbed a canister of medical-grade halothane, a powerful anesthetic gas she had requisitioned for the trauma center. "Taeyoung, give me your mask," she ordered. "What are you doing?" "They're coming through the sunroom. The air filters are manual there. I'm going to flood the zone." As the assassins breached the glass of the sunroom, moving with lethal, synchronized precision, Zuri climbed into the crawlspace above the vents. Her heart was a ticking clock, but her hands were steady. She cracked the valve on the halothane. Below her, the assassins slowed. Their movements became sluggish. Their thermal collapse was artificial, induced by the gas. One by one, they slumped against the white wicker furniture, their weapons clattering to the floor. Zuri dropped from the vent, her nursing mask still strapped to her face. She looked like a vengeful angel in a medical gown. She grabbed a discarded radio from one of the fallen men. "Kangdae," she whispered into the channel. "The sunroom is clear. But Sukju isn't with us. He's not in the foyer." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Kangdae's voice, cold and sharp, "I know. He's standing right outside my door with a manual override key." The double agent had revealed himself. The conflict was no longer about Seoul, it was about the rot inside the Bayou Fortress. "Zuri," Kangdae continued, his voice steady despite the sound of Sukju hammering at the reinforced door. "There is a medical emergency override button in the kitchen pantry. It's marked for oxygen failure. Hit it. It will vent the entire second floor." "But you're on the second floor," Zuri cried. "Do it. I'd rather die by your hand than his." Zuri sprinted. This was the dread phase. She reached the pantry, found the hidden panel, and slammed her fist into the red button. A high-pitched siren wailed. The air was sucked out of the upstairs hallway in a massive vacuum. Sukju, caught in the corridor, gasped for air that wasn't there. He collapsed, clawing at his throat, just as Taehyung and the remaining loyalist guards arrived to zip-tie him. When the air was restored, Kangdae walked out of his office. He didn't look at the traitors. He looked down the stairs at Zuri. She was covered in dust, her hands trembling, the halothane canister still clutched in her arms. He descended the stairs, the power shift, moving entirely toward the woman who had saved him twice in a month. He stopped one step above her, forcing her to look up. "You told me you wouldn't carry a gun," Kangdae said, his voice a rasp of admiration. "You didn't need one. You used the air itself as a blade." "I told you," Zuri said, her breath finally coming back. "I'm a nurse. I know exactly how much a body can take before it breaks." Kangdae turned to his men. "Prepare the cars. We leave for the gala at the Museum of Fine Arts tonight. We aren't hiding anymore. If Dong-sun wants a war, we will give him one in the center of his own world. The air is turning toxic, and the traitors are being unmasked. Will Zuri's training be enough to survive the gala?" Subscribe to Black X Korean Mafia Boss Stories to witness the ascension of the Queen. The Museum of Fine Arts in Houston was a monument to glass and white stone, a temple of culture that felt miles away from the blood-stained foyer of the River Oaks estate. But for Zuri, the museum was simply a different kind of battlefield. Tonight, the invisibility cloak was being discarded for a crown. As the black SUV pulled up to the red carpet, the flashbulbs of the paparazzi created a staccato of artificial lightning. Kangdae stepped out first, looking every bit the king, in a bespoke midnight blue tux. Then he reached back to hand Zuri out of the car. The crowd went silent for a heartbeat. Zuri was a vision of cultural fusion. She wore a traditional Korean hanbok, but the fabric was a vibrant African wax print, heavy cotton dyed in swirling patterns of gold, indigo, and crimson. The high waist and voluminous skirt of the Korean silhouette met the bold, geometric soul of her grandmother's heritage. It was the ultimate purple cow visual, a statement that she didn't just belong in Kangdae's world, she was redefining it. Stay close, Kangdae whispered, his hand resting on the small of her back. The old guard is here in force. They think this is a funeral for my leadership. Show them it's a coronation. The gala was a sea of gold and blood. Beneath the towering abstract sculptures, the elite of the international shipping world sipped champagne. Among them were Dongsun's emissaries, men in gray suits with cold eyes who watched Zuri with a mixture of confusion and contempt. Zuri's internal tempo rules were at a high frequency. Every 30 seconds, she performed a check. Did the waiter's gait match the uniform? Why was the ventilation hum higher in the south gallery? Why was the lead security guard avoiding Kangdae's gaze? They moved through the crowd toward the VIP balcony, where the most powerful heads of the syndicate sat. Kangdae was greeted with stiff bows and forced smiles. "You look well, brother," a voice rang out. A man stepped forward, Dongsun. He was younger than Kangdae, with a face that was handsome but hollow, like a statue carved from ice. He looked at Zuri, his eyes raking over her wax-print hanbok. "And this must be the famous nurse from Chicago," Dongsun said, his English perfect and condescending. "I heard you have a talent for chemistry." "I have a talent for spotting rot," Zuri replied, her voice calm. "Whether it's in a piece of meat or a family tree." Dongsun's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Be careful, little bird. In this building the air is thin. Sometimes people forget how to breathe." Zuri felt the dread settle in her stomach. It wasn't a threat, it was a countdown. She looked up at the ceiling. The museum used a sophisticated HVAC system to protect the priceless paintings, a system that regulated humidity and oxygen levels with surgical precision. She noticed the microflaw. The air vents in the VIP section weren't blowing. The white silk ribbons used as decorative accents on the pillars were perfectly still, while the ribbons in the lower hall were dancing. "Kangdae," she whispered, leaning in as if to share a romantic secret. "The air has stopped moving. Look at the ribbons." Kangdae scanned the room. He saw it too. The exits were being quietly blocked by waiters, who were pulling small, clear masks from their pockets. The ventilation isn't just off, Zuri realized, her professional vocabulary kicking in. They've reversed the intake. They're going to flood the room with an odorless sedative or a neurotoxin. They don't want a messy shootout, they want a medical emergency that takes out the entire leadership. "How long?" Kangdae asked. "If they've timed the ppm, parts per million, correctly, 30 seconds. The quiet luxury of the gala turned into a suffocating trap. Zuri grabbed a bottle of high-proof vodka from a passing tray and a silk napkin. "We need to get to the server room," she said. "It has an independent, pressurized oxygen supply to prevent fire damage to the computers. Follow me." As the first few guests began to stumble, their eyes glazing over in the early stages of thermal collapse, Zuri led Kangdae toward the back service corridor. They passed a guard who tried to block their path. Kangdae neutralized him with a sharp, clinical strike to the temple, moving with the slow rhythm of a predator. They reached the heavy steel door of the server room. Zuri swiped a keycard she had lifted from a guard earlier. Inside, the air was cold and crisp, smelling of ozone and electronics. But they weren't alone. Standing by the main terminal, holding a gas mask and a burner phone, was Sukju. He had escaped custody. He wasn't choking. He was smiling. "You think this is about a family feud?" Sukju laughed, his voice muffled by the mask. "Kangdae is too soft for America. He wants to pay fair wages and build schools. Seoul wants a monster. Dong's son provided the poison, but I provided the map. I am the one who ensures the IL-SIM survives, even if the boss doesn't." He raised a suppressed handgun, aiming it directly at Kangdae's chest. Zuri didn't wait for permission. She knew Sukju's microflaw. He was an old-school traditionalist. He didn't consider her a threat. He was focused entirely on Kangdae. She reached into her garter, where she kept a sedative-loaded syringe, the same one she had used to threaten him in Houston. In one fluid motion she lunged. She didn't go for his heart. She went for the pressure point behind the ear, where the skin was thinnest. The needle sank in. Sukju's eyes widened. His finger tightened on the trigger, but the sedative was a high-speed neural blocker. His muscles turned to water. The gun clattered to the floor, unfired. "Ghost!" Sukju hissed, his head hitting the server rack as he slid to the floor. "I'm the ghost who just turned off your lights," Zuri whispered. Kangdae stood over the fallen traitor. He looked at Zuri, his chest heaving as he breathed in the clean, pressurized air. The realization hit him hard. His mafia was a house of cards, and the only person who hadn't tried to kill him was the woman who had every reason to walk away. "The gala is over," Kangdae said, looking at the monitors showing the chaos in the hall below. "Dong-sun will realize we aren't among the bodies. We have 10 minutes before they breach this room." "Where do we go?" Zuri asked. "To the only place they won't look," Kangdae said, a dark fire in his eyes. "We're leaving the country. But we aren't going to Seoul. Betrayal has a scent, and it's stronger than poison." Zuri just took down the old guard with a single needle. If you're rooting for this duo, subscribe to Black X Korean Mafia Boss Stories. The final chapter is coming. The drive from Houston to Galveston was a high-speed blur of neon highway lights and the salty, heavy air of the Gulf Coast. They weren't in the armored SUVs anymore. They were in a nondescript, silver sedan, a ghost car pulled from one of Kangdae's hidden suburban garages. Inside the cabin, the silence was heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the engine and the rhythmic tapping of Zuri's fingers on her medical bag. The adrenaline from the museum was fading, replaced by the cold, hard reality of their situation. "You're bleeding," Zuri said, her voice clinical but underlined with a tremor. She pointed to Kangdae's shoulder, where a shard of glass from the server room breach had sliced through the midnight blue silk of his tuxedo. "It's nothing," Kangdae replied, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. "In my world, nothing leads to sepsis," Zuri countered. She didn't ask for permission. She opened her kit and pulled out a pair of surgical shears. With the professional vocabulary of a seasoned medic, she began to work. "Lean forward. I need to debride the wound before the internal hemorrhaging starts." As she worked, she realized the power shift had reached its final stage. The man who controlled the logistics of half a continent was sitting perfectly still, yielding to her expertise. She was the one holding the blade now, a scalpel, and he trusted her not to slip. "Why the Lagos connection?" Zuri asked as she applied a local anesthetic. "You mentioned my grandmother. How do you even know about her village?" "I told you, Zuri. I am a man of logistics," Kangdae said, wincing slightly as she removed the glass shard. "When I recruited you, I didn't just look at your grades. I looked at your roots. Your grandmother didn't just come from a village near Lagos. She came from a lineage of Ialode, women of high economic and political power. Leaders. You aren't just a waitress who got lucky. You have the blood of queens in you. That's why you saw the poison. That's why you didn't run." Zuri paused, the suture needle hovering over his skin. She had always thought of her grandmother's stories as folklore, a way to keep their heritage alive in a cold city like Chicago. To hear a mafia boss validate it as a tactical asset was jarring. "The ILSIM think the world is a map of ports and warehouses," Kangdae continued, his voice dropping to a low rasp. "They are blind to the streets. They are blind to the networks of the invisible people. In Lagos, in the markets, in the backstreets of Chicago, that is where the real power lies. Dong-sun wants to fight a corporate war. I want to fight a ghost war." He looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the passing streetlights. "We are going to a private airstrip in Galveston. From there, we disappear. I am handing the Chicago and Houston keys to my lieutenants. Let them fight over the scraps. We are going to build something they can't see coming." "A new family," Zuri whispered, finishing the last stitch. "A new alliance," Kangdae corrected. "One that doesn't rely on the old guard or the traditions of a dying country. We are going to blend your streets with my steel." They reached the outskirts of Galveston. The smell of the ocean was overpowering now, a mix of brine and decaying seaweed. The tempo rules shifted. The car slowed as they approached a rusted chain-link fence that led to a decommissioned military landing strip. Suddenly, the microflaw appeared. The gate was open. Kangdae slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. From the shadows of the abandoned hangars, 3 motorcycles roared to life. They weren't the heavy cruisers of a street gang. They were high-performance racing bikes, painted matte black. "Hold on!" Kangdae shouted, throwing the car into reverse. The action exploded. The motorcyclists moved with the slow, fast-slow rhythm of professional hitmen. They didn't fire at the windows, they fired at the tires. A sharp, metallic pop echoed through the cabin. The car lurched as the front left tire disintegrated. The sedan spun, the smell of burning rubber filling the air, before slamming sideways into a stack of empty shipping containers. The silence that followed was terrifying. Zuri's head hit the window. Her vision swam. She saw red, not the red of blood, but the red blinking lights of a drone hovering directly above the car. "They found us," she whispered, her hand fumbling for her bag. Kangdae was already moving. He kicked the door open, his gun drawn. He pulled Zuri from the wreckage, shielding her body with his own. "The plane is 500 yards out," he hissed, his eyes scanning the darkness. "The motorcycles are circling for a second pass. Zuri, listen to me. Your bag isn't just for medicine anymore." He reached into the hidden compartment of her nursing kit, the one his men had installed on the plane. Beneath the vials of epinephrine and the rolls of gauze lay a compact, black handgun. "I told you I wouldn't carry one," Zuri said, her voice trembling. "And I told you that you decide who lives," Kangdae replied. "Dongsun's men are coming. If they get past me, the world loses the only person who can see the thermal collapse coming. Choose, Zuri. Be a witness or be the storm." The sound of the motorcycles grew louder, a mechanical growl that felt like it was inside her chest. The drone lowered, its camera lens whirring as it locked onto their position. Zuri looked at the gun. Then she looked at Kangdae. She saw the man who had traded his kingdom for a chance to start over with her. She saw the king, who had become her shield. She reached into the bag. Her fingers closed around the cold, textured grip of the weapon. "I'm not a soldier," she whispered, her eyes hardening as the first motorcyclist rounded the corner of the hangar, the moonlight glinting off his visor. "But I'm a very fast learner. The alliance is under fire. Zuri has a choice to make, the healer or the hunter. If you're rooting for this duo to make it to that plane, subscribe to Black X Korean Mafia Boss Stories right now. The finale is just seconds away." The gunshot didn't sound like the ones in the movies. It was a sharp, clinical crack that echoed off the corrugated metal of the hangars. Zuri didn't aim for the rider's head, she aimed for this systemic failure. The bullet struck the fuel line of the lead motorcycle just as it leaned into a high-speed turn. A plume of blue flame erupted. The bike lost its thermal balance, sliding across the tarmac in a shower of sparks before tumbling into the tall grass. The other 2 riders swerved, their momentum broken. "Move!" Kangdae shouted. They sprinted toward the end of the runway, where a small, twin-engine turboprop sat with its propellers already spinning, slicing the humid air into ribbons. The drone above them dived, a sleek, predatory shadow. It wasn't just a camera, it was a delivery system. A small, metallic cylinder dropped from its undercarriage. "Gas!" Zuri yelled, recognizing the canister's silhouette. "Don't breathe. Mask up." She didn't need to be told. She reached into her bag, the bag that had transitioned from a student's tool to a survival kit, and pulled out 2 compact respirators. She slammed one onto Kangdae's face and fitted her own just as a cloud of white vapor billowed across the path. They ran through the fog, the invisibility of the smoke working in their favor. The remaining motorcyclists lost their visual. By the time the air cleared, Kangdae and Zuri were at the stairs of the plane. Taehyung was at the door, his submachine gun barking as he suppressed the riders. "Get in. Now." The interior of the plane was a stark contrast to the Gulf Stream. No leather, no champagne. This was a cargo hold, a logistics vessel. As the plane taxied and roared into the night sky over the Gulf of Mexico, the gravity pulled them back into their seats. Zuri pulled off her mask, her lungs burning, her hands finally beginning to shake. She looked at her palms. They were stained with Kangdae's blood and the soot from the explosion. "We're out," she whispered. "No," Kang Dae said, looking out the window at the receding lights of the Texas coast. We're just, in media res, the middle of the story, not the end. He reached into a secure locker and pulled out 2 passports. They weren't Korean. They weren't American. They were diplomatic documents from a West African nation Zuri had only seen in her grandmother's photos. Dong-sun thinks he won because he took the Chicago ports, Kang Dae said, his voice returning to that quiet luxury tone, though his eyes were now those of a revolutionary. He doesn't realize that the future of ILSIM isn't in shipping oil. It's in the green belt of the Atlantic. We are going to Lagos, Zuri. To your people. To build the network they should have built 50 years ago. Zuri looked at the passport. Her photo was there, but the name was different. It wasn't Zuri the waitress or Zuri the nurse. It was a name that carried the weight of the ILOD. The Afro-Korean alliance, Zuri said, the words tasting like a new reality. They looked at us and saw a micro-flaw, Kang Dae said, taking her hand. His grip was firm, a bond that transcended the contract they had signed in the park. They thought a black woman and a fallen king were a weakness. They didn't realize that when you mix gold and blood, you get something that can never be broken. As the plane leveled out at 30,000 feet, the tempo of the story slowed. The dread was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating purpose. Zuri opened her medical bag one last time. She took out her grandmother's Bible and placed the gold-embossed business card from the obsidian lily inside its pages. She wouldn't need it anymore. She wasn't an employee. She wasn't a consultant. She was the architect of a new empire. From the streets of Chicago to the heights of a new global empire, Zuri and Kang Dae's story has only just begun. Their ascension will change the world. Did you enjoy this gold and blood journey? This is the end of Season 1. Comment Season 2 if you want to see the war for Lagos. Subscribe to Black X Korean Mafia Boss Stories so you never miss a drop.